How's it going, folks? Welcome back to the channel. So there is no game this weekend, so I'm going to do as promised. I'm going to take a look at the next Celtic manager and some left field options as well. Let's get straight into the video. So before I get started, the usual call to action. If you do watch these videos often and you like the channel, do just hit that subscribe button below. There's about 70% of people who are still not subscribed but do watch regularly. So if you do watch the videos and you do enjoy them, just hit the subscribe button. It helps the channel grow and I really appreciate it as well. So let's get into the Celtic manager. So it's obviously a broad choice of people and there are people being linked with the job right, left and centre. So I'm going to run through some of the options that are being really tagged with the job, and then I'm going to look at some of the more left field options that might be good for the job as well. So we'll start with the favourite for the job, and that's Chris Wilder. Obviously he dropped in price when he left the Sheffield United job the last couple of days, so he has risen to the favourite to get the Celtic manager job. So obviously there are pros and cons with each manager, and Chris Wilder has a good record there as a manager. Despite this season, despite how bad Sheffield United were, he does have a good track record with this club. So obviously he took them over in League One. They started off the season pretty poorly, but they ended up winning the League One title with 100 points. It was a record for the club at the time, up into the Championship, and then eventually led them into the Premier League and finished 9th in the Premier League. So that record is very strong for a manager who's working with a small budget like Sheffield United would have started off with, and then bringing them up into the Premier League. The second season is always the most difficult one, so I don't really want to hold too much judgment on Chris Wilder as that. If you look at some of the comments from managers about Chris Wilder, Pep Guardiola, for example, he said that if Chris Wilder had the same budget he'd be fighting for the title, and if he was fighting with the same budget as Chris Wilder was working with, he'd be fighting relegation as well. So essentially what he was saying was Chris Wilder is an excellent coach. And I think you do see that because it wasn't your regular British team coming up into the Premier League and being really defensive. He had a system in play that he invented himself with the overlapping centre backs, and that shows you that he does have an innovative mind, which would be very much wanted at Celtic at this point in time, because I think we've been lacking in sort of innovative voices, and he can build from the bottom up. So he took them from League One up to the Premier League, and finishing 9th in your first season in the Premier League, that is nothing to turn your nose up at. I think Chris Wilder would be a pretty good choice. The one thing that you do worry about was even when they were fighting for promotion into the Premier League and the Championship, they didn't score all that many goals. Their first season in the Premier League, even though they finished 9th, they didn't score that many goals, and that is eventually what came to haunt them this year. They didn't really develop the forward-thinking manner. They were very solid defensively, and then when you see some of the players like Jack O'Connell getting injured for the season and then Dean Henderson leaving them, those little gaps appeared in the system, and that's eventually what happened to Sheffield United, and they're probably going to go down. So there are, as I said, flaws with Chris Wilder because his teams are very solid, very well coached, very well developed, but they don't score all that many goals. So that would be the biggest flaw I'd point with Chris Wilder. I wouldn't hold this season against him too much, but like I said, the evidence is sort of there that in previous years they didn't score that many goals either, but they are a very well coached side. The second favourite for the job is the man who's currently in the interim job at Celtic, and that's John Kennedy. Now, we're starting to get a feel of what John Kennedy is like as a manager. I do like the way he sort of holds himself in the press conferences. He's quite honest, he's quite open, his press conferences are quite interesting. There's no really, it's not just hot takes, it's not just, we played quite well. He's actually developing his answers. He knows what the flaws in the team are, he knows where he wants to fix them, and we're starting to see what style of play, and it's very much sort of a possession based Brendan Rodgers-esque style play that John Kennedy seems to want to play. Now obviously there are flaws with John Kennedy as well. The first being that he was part of the coaching system and part of the team that failed this year. I mean, you wonder, and nobody really knows unless they have been there, or unless they have good sources, and I don't have good sources within Celtic to tell me how much John Kennedy had in terms of power at the club, how much of this was actually his doing, how much of it was Neil Lennon's doing, whether or not Neil Lennon listened to him, whether or not he had much choice in the starting team. You do wonder about that, but culpability is something that Neil Lennon had to deal with, so I'm not sure I would want John Kennedy going in with already the pressure on his shoulders that he was part of the coaching staff that failed under Neil Lennon, so he's already under pressure, and you can see that already after 2 games. The Dundee United game was not a good performance, and already fans are starting to probably think that maybe John Kennedy was just as culpable as Neil Lennon. So that's why I would worry about John Kennedy. I would like to see him go somewhere else first and see how he gets on at a higher level in terms of his coaching, in terms of maybe taking a first team role and seeing how he actually develops his own style of play over a course of a year or so. And then if it's quite good, there's no reason why John Kennedy couldn't come back to the club. Third in the favourites odds is Roy Keane, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it came out in the Sun last night that he wants the job, and it's sort of just the media playing this role up. Roy Keane should take the Celtic job, because wouldn't it be great to see Roy Keane going up against Steven Gerrard in the SPFL. Roy Keane, firstly, was quite disrespectful when he was a player at Celtic. In times, he, especially post his Celtic career, he was quite critical of the way the club was being run, and maybe rightly so. He does demand a level of professionalism like no other player. For example, the Saipan situation, if people remember that, that is essentially what you're getting with Roy Keane. He will force standards up, but I don't think his track record is good enough as a manager to take a role this big, and he'd essentially be the big money, big name signing for Celtic for no particular reason. He wouldn't develop the team any further down the line in 5 years. He might have success in the short term, but Celtic will not be in a better place once Roy Keane leaves the job, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for a manager to come in and be champion straight away. I'm looking for a manager who's going to come in, rip up the script, and Celtic still be successful when that manager leaves the door, when he's done. That's what I want to see. I want to see a progression plan, and you're not getting that with Roy Keane. And we've seen that with him, his coaching roles in Sunderland, in Ipswich, and again with Ireland as well. He busted a lot of heads when he was with Ireland, fell out with a lot of players. You don't want that. And that's all I have to say about Roy Keane getting the Celtic job. Following on from him is Eddie Howe. Now, Eddie Howe's fallen down the list in terms of favourites to be the job. Obviously, he was the favourite a couple of weeks ago. He was on Sky Sports, and I always think it's quite interesting when a former or a manager who's currently looking for work is on Sky Sports, because that's generally them trying to get out there and get their name out there and remind people that they used to be a great coach. So I think Eddie Howe is definitely on the lookout for a job, because that's the second time in less than a year now that he's been on Sky Sports. And I do think that he would be a very good person for this job. I still would, if I was to choose one, Eddie Howe would still be up there in terms of the people that I want to take the club, because he's got a proven track record in terms of being able to build from the very bottom up with a very small budget, very tight budget, and continuously bring in and bring forward younger players and improve the team. Now, the one thing, and again, you're looking at the downside of these teams, is that Eddie Howe's teams were always defensively frail, and that's one place that Celtic need to improve dramatically if they want to actually go forward and move forward and compete with Rangers next year. Defensively, they need to improve, and Eddie Howe, I'm not sure if he's going to do that with Celtic. He will have them playing really nice football. He knows how to get players on a budget, which is an absolute essential asset if you want to take the Celtic job. And I do think that he would eventually leave Celtic in a better place than he did when he came in. But you do wonder about the free hits. You wonder as well about the pressure. And now, Celtic is a massive job. Managing Bournemouth, fair enough, it was in the Premier League, but they have 13,000 people in their stadium. That's the size of the club it is. Celtic is 60,000 people, European nights, pressure of always continually winning every single week. You have to win or it's a failure. So I think that would be something that you'd question about Eddie Howe. Is he ready for a role that big? Steven Gerrard, for example, came in, but he was used to pressure like that. He played in the Champions League. He played in European Cup finals. He's been in a Premier League title race. He knows what it takes to win. And I'm not sure Eddie Howe has proven that just yet, but I would like to see him get the chance. And I do think he would be an excellent appointment for Celtic at the club. After him is Enzo Maresca, and this one is sort of left field. So Enzo Maresca, if you don't know who he is, I know a lot of people have spoken about him. He's a Man City under-23's boss. And recently enough, Robert Snodgrass that came out, he obviously a big Celtic fan himself, and he worked under him at West Ham. He said he's an elite level coach. He's excellent. He's always studying other big coaches. He's always trying to work out good game plans. And he said he's absolutely fantastic as a coach. And that, for me, is a massive boost for Celtic if they do manage to get him, because he seems to be that sort of progressive coach, the coach that talks about the system, that works in a system and knows how to sort of get the players into position and coach the players into being better. It's not about getting in the best players. You do need the best players, but often you can see managers doing a lot better with worse players because they know how to coach them very well. And that's what I'd love to see at Celtic at the minute, because that's sort of what's missing. Celtic have a really quite a decent squad, I would say. It's not the best Celtic squad that's ever been there, but you've got a real good spine there. I know Chris Ryer might be out the door, but if he stays, he's an excellent person to build your team around in terms of defensively. Centre midfield, Cal McGregor, he's one of the best midfielders in the Scottish Premier League. David Turnbull, up and coming, excellent star. And then up front, Albion Ajeti, he's only 23. He can still improve if the coaching is there. So I don't think Odsonne Edouard is going to be there. So I don't want to say I'm going to build the team around him. But you've got a spine there. So if Enzo Maresca comes in and he's able to coach these players, you could see a much better Celtic overnight almost. And that's, you want that instant impact, but you want someone who's going to build for the long term as well. And one of the benefits of Man City is that they have a clear pathway the entire way through their system, from under 8s up, from the women's team to the other clubs around the globe that are part of the City group. They all play under this one way, all the way up through the academies, all the way up into the senior squad. And that's why you're seeing players like the likes of Phil Foden coming into the team and being stars in the team almost instantly as soon as they're in there, because they're coming through the system and they're used to playing it. They're tactically knowledgeable and they know how to play in this system. And I would love to see something like that come to Celtic, and just building for the future, building on good solid foundations as opposed to short-term planning, in which Celtic have been doing for the last couple of years. And I suppose one thing that is making Enzo Maresca and probably pushing him up the odds list there a little bit is that Fergal Harkin, the head of Man City's academy, he's been linked with the director of football role. And there's an Irish journalist that has been speaking to him, and it is sort of something that is potentially going to happen. It is something that he is being linked with. So if Fergal Harkin comes in as director of football, Enzo Maresca would be a no-brainer for me, because they know each other and they can link everything up, as opposed to the director of football and the manager sort of going head to head. They need to be working together if that's going to work as a partnership. And if that's a model that Celtic want to go down, the director of football role, then they need the manager to suit the same mindset as the director of football. So if Fergal Harkin gets the director of football role, then I don't see why Enzo Maresca would not get the management role. Now, to the left field options, none of these managers are currently being linked with the Celtic job, but there's a couple of lists of people that I do think would be cheaper to get and would be a risk, but also I do think that they have a track record enough there to take that risk. I know Celtic took a risk with Ronnie Deila and didn't really work out, but I do think some of these names might be actually decent enough, and they might be worth the risk if you're going to, narrow that gap a little bit and just build for the future. So the first name is Carlos Corbin. He's the Huddersfield manager at the minute. He worked under Marcelo Bielsa at their under-23s, and he also worked as part of their coaching ticket for the promotion side from the Championship into the Premier League. Marcelo Bielsa glowingly speaking about him, saying that he would bounce ideas off him all the time, and often he would be the man that would actually give his opinion as opposed to Marcelo Bielsa giving his opinion. So I think at the minute he's not doing fantastically well with Huddersfield, but he has only taken over the job, and you can already see that he wants to play sort of the Bielsa ball, the dynamic, fast moving, fast transitioning sort of play. And if he's working under Bielsa and Bielsa respects his opinion, then you must think that he would have to be a very good coach. So I think he'd be a decent enough person to get in, even on the coaching ticket, if you're not getting him as the first team manager. And the fact that Huddersfield are sort of a mid-table Championship side, he wouldn't be that expensive. He would be gettable. The only thing is that he's only taken the first job he's ever had as a first team coach, so he might be reluctant to actually move from Huddersfield. Jesse Marsch is another person that I think would be an absolute excellent appointment for Celtic. He's obviously the Red Bull Salzburg manager, and he's taken over from where Ralph Ragnick left off, really, and just progressively moving on the club, moving on the team, and coaching the team to a very, very high standard. The difference between him and Corbin is that he would be pretty much ungettable. He'd be very expensive, and Red Bull Salzburg are a much better place than Celtic are at the minute. So I think he would be an excellent appointment, but I think he would be very difficult to get. Another man that I do think is gettable and probably should be one that Celtic are definitely looking at, that would be Thomas Frank, the Brentford manager. And a lot of people might be familiar, but some people may not be familiar with what Brentford are doing at the minute. But a couple of years ago, they scrapped their academy system and they came up with the Moneyball system. They've taken that across. And since then, they came very, very close to promotion last year. And they're currently in the promotion spots again this year. They fell short at the playoff phase last year. So I think the way that Brentford are moving and developing as a club, if Thomas Frank has even 70% of a say in what is going on in terms of the transfers and the way that they're doing business, then I think he would be an excellent person to get into the Celtic role in some way, shape or form. Just transfer wise, if you look at Brentford over the last couple of years, they're doing exactly what Celtic want to do, but to a much higher standard. They're buying low, they're developing fast, and they're selling high. So the difference between that and Celtic is Celtic are buying low, they're developing fast, but they're not selling high. They're holding on that little bit too long to the quality players. And you do want to see quality players, and you don't really genuinely too often want to see too much turnover. But if the turnover is to the extent where Brentford are doing it, where they're bringing in players who are just as good, if not better, as the players that they sold, then you don't mind seeing the sort of turnover that they have. For example, the last couple of years, last year, for example, they sold Ollie Watkins and signed Ben Rama. Ben Rama went to West Ham. Ollie Watkins obviously went to Aston Villa. As the replacement, straight away, they had someone in there for Ollie Watkins, who was an excellent player for them. They brought in Ivan Toney, 26 goals in the Championship this year. They already had someone there that was going to replace him, replace his goals, and almost improve on it. And they'll probably sell Toney next year, and they'll bring in another person. They'll have someone there, and that's what you want to see Celtic doing, instead of this shit where Celtic are banging loanies to replace players until they have a replacement there. You need a replacement already in place before you sell the players. We'll see the same with Odsonne Edouard. There's nobody there that's going to be replacing his goals, and Celtic are going to struggle next year unless they bring in a striker. The final person that I think he'd be a risk. I'm not going to lie. This is left field. He would be a risk, and he doesn't have the same track record as some of the names above. But I think he would be a decent person maybe to take a risk on, and it would be very left field. So, like I said, this guy's not getting a Celtic job, but I do think it's worth considering these type of players or these type of people and these type of managers who are part of bigger things than just, he won 3 trophies when he was in charge of the club. So the name is Luc Holtz. He is the current Luxembourg manager. And you might think, yeah, Luxembourg, they're a minnow of international football, and you'd be right. But 17 years ago, essentially what Luxembourg did was they tore up their system because they weren't having any success. They wanted to be as successful, or at least competitive, with the likes of France, with the likes of Spain, those countries in and around them. That's not going to happen because they don't have enough people. And obviously their best players are leaving to other clubs. But essentially what they did was they created a nationwide academy system that was developing the players, and they'd get them jobs so that they wouldn't want to leave Luxembourg, that they'd stay, they'd get paid to play professional football, but they'd also have a job on the side as well. So they made it very nice to stay in Luxembourg, very attractive to stay in Luxembourg, as opposed to going and trying to fight your way to the top in France or somewhere with a much tougher league to develop in. So what we're seeing now is sort of the improvements that they've seen in the last 17 years. So Luc Holtz took the job in 2010. In 2010, they were ranked 122nd in the world. They had only won 6 games in their 22 years. And now, as a manager for Luxembourg, Luc Holtz has 19 wins as the Luxembourg manager. He's taken them to the top 100. I think they're 97th at the minute in the world rankings. They're second in their Nations League group at the minute. And they put it right up to France last year as well. They came within a kick of the ball from beating France, and they were just fantastic. They're playing excellent football. They're really tough to beat. They're punching well above their weight in terms of where they should be. So I do think that it's worth considering these type of people, or at least looking at who is in the background there and who's making the decisions and who's developing the players and who's coaching them. And it's the type of thing that, like, 9 of the starting 11 players from their last game came through their academy, played at under 21 levels, and they're not playing. I think 6 of them are playing outside of Luxembourg, so they're keeping it all in-house and developing it from there. So I do think that's something that should be considered when looking at it. Obviously, I said look, Holtz is not getting a Celtic job, as I said, but it's just thinking outside the box, thinking outside the ordinary, seeing if there's people out there that would be cheaper to get than the likes of Roy Keane, who is going to take the club, might be successful for a year or two, and then the club's in disarray again in a couple of years. This turnover of nonsense managers who produce sometimes and then just falls apart. I want to see Celtic with a European-based approach, a director of football coming in, everything working as once, buying low, selling high, developing players from the academy, and building for Europe. Domestically it will come. I have been saying it all year. Celtic have built for domestic. They are not good enough for Europe. If you build good enough for Europe, you will be good enough domestically. What do you think? Who do you think should be the next Celtic manager? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know some of the names that you think might be a good shot as well. And again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, do just hit that subscribe button below and you'll get a video, 3 videos or so every single week. I'm Ended Call. Thanks for watching.